At 20:47 on a sticky Thursday afternoon in Nashville, James pulled into the lot like he always did, slow, careful, the way you move when your body never fully forgave the war. Physical therapy ran long. It usually did. The kind of pain he lived with didn't care about schedules, and neither did the VA shuttle that dropped him off 2 blocks away when the driver got impatient. James made it the rest of the way on his own, one measured step at a time, keys already in his hand because he liked being ready. Being ready was a habit you don't unlearn. He reached his door, looked down at the lock and stopped. It wasn't his lock. New metal, new shine. The key he'd carried for years didn't even slide in. For a second he thought he had the wrong unit. That happens when you're tired. When your head is foggy from meds and heat. But the doormat was his, the cheap one that curled at the edges. And the scratch on the frame, right where he bumped it moving in, was still there. James tried the key anyway. Nothing. He knocked once. Then again louder, because maybe maintenance was inside. Maybe there'd been break-in and someone did the right thing. Maybe this was a mistake that would turn into an apology. No footsteps, no voices, no, who is it? Just the buzz of bugs in the bushes and a car stereo thumping somewhere far off. Then he noticed the pile on the curb. At first it looked like trash, a few black bags, a box with torn tape, a blanket half dragged in the dirt, and then he saw the corner of his old duffel, the one with the stitched name patch he never threw away. He saw his boots, his work shirts, a framed certificate, face down on the concrete like it had been slapped there. James walked over like he was moving underwater. There was his Purple Heart, still in the frame, glass cracked down the middle. There was his medical brace. There was a plastic bin with pill bottles rattling inside it, the labels turning in the sunlight. There was a folded American flag, creased wrong, not the way it's supposed to be. Not the way it was handed to him at the funeral, where he promised himself he'd stay standing, no matter what. He stood over the pile, breathing shallow. His hands started to shake and he hated that, because shaking felt like losing. Like giving something permission. He pulled out his phone. No service for a second, then the bars came back. He called the landlord, straight to voicemail. He called again, voicemail. He searched his messages. Nothing new. No warning. No, we need to talk. No notice taped to the door. No paper under the mat. No court date. No pay or quit. No nothing. James sat down on the curb because the world suddenly felt too tall. He didn't cry right away. He just stared at his own life dumped out like it didn't matter. Like it was a storage unit someone cleared because rent went up. A woman from upstairs cracked her blinds and disappeared. A guy walked by with groceries, saw James, looked away faster than he should have. And then someone said, "Hey, you okay, man?" James looked up. The guy was mid-40s, sunburned arms, jeans, work boots, a gray tee with a faded logo. He had that calm posture that some men carry, like they've been in loud places and learned how to be quiet inside them. Yeah, James lied automatically. The guy didn't buy it. That's your stuff. James nodded. What happened? James swallowed. They changed my locks, while I was at therapy. The guy's face tightened. Who did? My landlord, or somebody, I don't know, I can't get in. My key doesn't work. The guy crouched near the curb, careful not to touch anything like he didn't want to make it worse. You got an eviction notice? No. Court paper? No. Sheriff come by? James shook his head. Nothing. The guy exhaled through his nose slow. That's not how it works. James gave a dry laugh with no humor in it. Apparently it is. The guy held out his hand. I'm Rick. James took it. James. Rick glanced at the Purple Heart frame, then back at James. You serve. Army. Rick's jaw worked like he was chewing on something he didn't want to swallow. You got anyone you can call? James wanted to say yes. Wanted to sound like someone with a network, someone with backup. But the truth was uglier. He had a couple numbers in his phone from guys he used to know. And he hadn't talked to them in months, because he didn't want to be the guy who always needed something. He had a sister 3 states away with kids and bills. He had a caseworker who meant well but took days to respond. So James said the simplest thing, no. Rick stared at the new lock for 2 seconds, then took out his phone. Give me 1 minute. He stepped away, turned slightly so James couldn't hear, but James caught pieces. Yeah, it's me. Right now. No, not a maybe. Bring a few. Rick ended the call, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and looked at James like he'd already decided something. "Stay right here," Rick said. "Don't leave your stuff." James blinked. "Who did you call?" Rick shrugged. "Friends." James watched him for a moment. "You a cop?" Rick snorted. "No." James hesitated. "Then who are your friends?" Rick looked down the walkway where the heat shimmered above the asphalt. "People who don't like bullies." That sounded good. Almost too good. James didn't know what to say, so he just sat there, one hand resting on the cracked frame like he could hold it together by force. Minutes passed, then the first bike rolled in. Low rumble. Heavy engine. Slow speed, like whoever was riding exactly the effect it would have, and didn't need to rush it. The rider turned into the lot and parked right in front of the building. Then a second bike. Then a third. Then more, not chaotic, not swarming, organized, like beads on a string. Within what felt like a blink, the front of the building had a line of motorcycles that didn't look like a car club meet. It looked like a statement. Some people stepped out of their apartments just far enough to stare. Someone upstairs whispered, "What is going on?" James felt his mouth go dry. Rick walked back toward the curb, calm as ever, and said, "You're not alone today." The men and women getting off the bikes weren't screaming. They weren't punching walls. They weren't doing the movie version of anything. They were just present. Leather vests, denim boots, faces that didn't flinch under pressure. A big guy with gray in his beard walked up first. He nodded at Rick, then looked at James. "Rick said you got locked out," the guy said, voice flat. James tried to stand. His leg didn't cooperate right away, and for a second he felt embarrassed, like he needed to perform strength in front of strangers. Then the big guy stepped closer, not to loom but to steady the moment. James stayed seated. "It's my place," James said. "At least it was. I pay rent. I've been there almost 2 years. I went to therapy, came back, locks changed, stuff's out." The big guy's eyes flicked over the pile. He saw the medical equipment, the Purple Heart, the brace. "What's your landlord's name?" he asked. James told him. The big guy nodded once and turned slightly, speaking to someone behind him. "Call a locksmith. Now." Then he pointed at another person. "Call a lawyer." Then a third. "Call the news desk. Tell them we've got a disabled vet illegally locked out and his medicine on the curb." James stared. You're calling the news?" The big guy looked back at him. "Sunlight fixes a lot." Rick crouched beside James again. "You got your lease? Anything with your name on it?" "It's inside," James said, then realized how stupid that sounded. "I mean it was." Rick nodded. "Any mail in your pocket? Something with this address?" James patted his bag, found an envelope from the VA bill copy he'd folded and forgotten. He handed them over. Rick checked the address and showed it to the big guy. "Haze on paper." The big guy's gaze lifted to the building. "Then he goes back inside." A woman in a vest walked over holding a bottle of water. "Here, sweetheart." James took it with shaking hands. From somewhere near the bikes, a voice called out, "Locksmith's on the way." Another voice, "Lawyers picking up." James felt his heart pounding like a drumline. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. Not because he didn't want it, but because it didn't fit his world anymore. The world he knew was paperwork and waiting rooms and people saying, "There's nothing we can do." Rick said, "Because you shouldn't have to fight this alone." And then, softer, "Because somebody saw you sitting here like you didn't matter." James looked down at his hands, at the tremor he couldn't control, and swallowed hard. "I don't want trouble," he said. The big guy answered without raising his voice. "Then your landlord shouldn't have started it." A few minutes later, the landlord's car pulled into the lot like nothing was wrong. A white sedan, slow, cautious. James recognized it immediately. His stomach dropped, and anger surged so hot it made him dizzy. The landlord stepped out, sunglasses on, phone to his ear like he was handling business. Then he saw the line of motorcycles. He froze, one foot still in the card. He slowly lowered the phone and stared at the crowd, like he'd walked into the wrong movie. Rick stepped forward first, but not aggressively, just enough to take control of the space. "Afternoon," Rick said. The landlord blinked. "What the hell is this?" The big guy stepped up beside Rick. "That's his home," he said, nodding toward James. "You changed the locks." The landlord's eyes darted. "He abandoned the unit." "He hasn't been," James cut in, voice sharp. "I was at physical therapy. I'm there every week. You know that." The landlord pointed at him, like James was the problem. You were behind on rent. James' hands clenched. I'm not behind. The landlord's mouth twitched. You refused the new lease. James stood up fully now, pain screaming through his knee, and he didn't care. Because you tried to raise my rent $400. The landlord shrugged, fake casual, market rate. The big guy's voice stayed calm. Where's your court order? The landlord's lips parted. No sound. Rick said, where's the eviction notice? The landlord tried again. I don't need. But his confidence was leaking out fast, like air from a tire. Rick shook his head. In Tennessee, you don't get to do this yourself. You don't get to change the locks to force a tenant out. You go through court. The landlord's jaw tightened. Who are you people? The big guy answered. People who make sure he gets back inside. And then, like the universe had perfect timing, a van pulled into the lot with OCKSMITH on the side. The locksmith stepped out, took one look at the crowd, and hesitated. Rick walked over, spoke to him quietly, and the locksmith relaxed just enough to do his job. Is this legal? The locksmith asked, glancing at James. James held up the mail with the address and his name. Rick added, tenant's been unlawfully excluded. We're restoring access and documenting everything. The locksmith looked toward the landlord. You got paperwork. The landlord said nothing. The locksmith nodded once, like that was all he needed, and walked toward the door. The landlord suddenly found his voice. You can't just, this is my property. The big guy turned his head slowly. And that's his home. The landlord took a step forward, then stopped when he realized nobody was moving out of the way. Nobody touched him. Nobody threatened him. They just stood there, a quiet wall. James felt something unfamiliar bloom in his chest. Not violence. Not vengeance. Support. The kind that makes you breathe again. Someone behind James said, Hey James, right? James turned. A woman with a calm face held up her phone. Mind if I record? For your protection. James nodded. Yeah, please. Another person came over with a small notepad, asking simple questions: date, time, who changed the locks, any witnesses. Rick said, tell it once. Tell it clean. Let the facts be the weapon. James nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. While that happened, Rick's phone rang. He answered and stepped a few feet away. Yeah, okay now. Good. He walked back. Lawyers on speaker. Rick held the phone out so James could hear. A woman's voice came through, professional and quick. James, I'm Attorney Daniels. Rick told me the basics. First, are you safe? James swallowed. Yeah. Second, do not agree to anything verbal with the landlord. Do not sign anything. We will request an emergency hearing if needed and pursue damages for unlawful exclusion. In Tennessee, landlords generally must use the court process. They can't lock you out themselves. The landlord scoffed, loud enough for the phone to catch it. Attorney Daniels' tone didn't change. I can hear you. Sir, if you've excluded a tenant without a court order, you may be exposing yourself to civil liability. James, I also want you to call local law enforcement and report an illegal self-help eviction. James looked at Rick. Rick nodded. We'll do it. If you've ever watched a person like the landlord realize the rules might apply to him, it's not dramatic in the way movies do it. It's smaller. Petty. His shoulders stiffen. His eyes narrow. He tries to act offended, like accountability is harassment. He pulled his phone out again, walked a few steps away, and started talking fast. Calling somebody. Probably trying to find his own backup, but it was too late. Because another car had just pulled in. Local news. A cameraman stepped out, shouldering gear. A reporter adjusted her mic and scanned the scene like she couldn't believe it was real. James' stomach flipped. Part of him wanted to run. To disappear. He hated attention. Especially this kind. Rick leaned close. This part matters, he said. Not because you want fame. Because landlords do this when they think nobody will notice. The reporter walked up. Sir, can we ask what happened? James hesitated, and then he looked down at his Purple Heart. He thought about Kandahar. About the IED. About the months where he couldn't sleep unless every door was locked. Because his brain refused to believe he was safe. And now here he was, in his own city. Not safe because a landlord wanted $400 more and figured a disabled vet would be too tired to fight. James nodded. Yeah, he said. I'll talk, he told it plainly. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't insult the landlord. He just said the truth. He went to therapy, came home, lock changed, Belongings on the curb, no notice, no court order, no warning. The reporter looked past him at the pile of medical gear. This is yours. James nodded. Yes. The cameraman zoomed in on the cracked frame. James saw the landlord's face in the corner of his eye. Tight and pale, the locksmith worked at the door like a surgeon. Tools out, hands steady. No shock. The deadbolt turned. The door opened. For a moment, nobody moved. It felt like a line in the sand. Then James stepped forward, slow, careful, and crossed the threshold. The air inside smelled like old coffee and laundry detergent. Normal smells. Home smells. He stood just inside the doorway and let himself feel it. His walls. His couch. His little kitchen table with the chipped edge. The place wasn't fancy. But it was his. He turned back toward the crowd. Rick nodded at him. You good? James' throat closed up. He managed, yeah. The big guy said, then we get your things inside. And that's what happened. Not violently. Not with chaos. Like a moving crew that ran on respect. Someone carried the bags. Someone wiped dirt off the frame and set it gently on the table. Someone picked up the brace like it was fragile glass. A woman found the bin with meds, checked the labels, and set it where James could reach it. The landlord tried one last time. He stood at the doorway, not crossing in, but acting like he still owned the moment. This is trespassing, he said. Attorney Daniel's voice came back through the phone, sharper now. No, sir. Excluding a tenant without due process can be unlawful. If you believe you have grounds, you file in court. You do not lock someone out. The reporter asked the landlord. Did you change the locks without an eviction order? The landlord looked at the camera like it was a weapon pointed at him. No comment. That, no comment, said everything. Now, let me pause you right here, because if this story is hitting you in the gut, do two quick things for me. Hit the like button so more renters and vets see this, and subscribe if you want stories where ordinary people get backed up when the system tries to grind them down. Back outside, a patrol car rolled by slowly, then pulled in. An officer stepped out, careful, assessing. Rick walked over first, hands visible, respectful. Officer, we've got a tenant illegally locked out. Locks were changed without a court order. He's back in now, and we're documenting. The officer looked at James's stuff, looked at the new lock hardware lying on the ground, looked at James. You live here? The officer asked. James nodded. Yes, sir. You got proof? James held up the mail again. The officer exhaled. Okay. Sir, he said, turning to the landlord, did you have a writ of possession? Court paperwork. The landlord's lips moved. No answer. The officer's tone stayed neutral but firm. Then you can't remove him like that. You'll need to follow the legal process. The landlord's face tightened. He's behind on rent. Then you go to court. The officer repeated, like he'd said it 100 times because he probably had. James felt his shoulders drop an inch, like his body had been waiting for someone official to say what he already knew. You can't just erase a person. The reporter did a stand-up in front of the bikes, summarizing the situation while James watched from his doorway. His hands still shook, but now it wasn't helplessness. It was adrenaline coming down. Rick stepped inside for a minute, leaned against the wall. You got anybody to stay with you tonight? He asked. James blinked. Why? Rick shrugged. Because some landlords get petty when they lose. I don't want you alone if he tries something stupid. James swallowed. I don't have anyone. Rick nodded once like he'd expected that. Then you do now. He stepped out and spoke to the big guy. 2 people volunteered to sit in the lot for a few hours, just being there, engines off, presents on. No threats, no intimidation. Just witnesses. While they waited, Attorney Daniels asked James questions and gave him next steps, what to write down, what to photograph, what to save. James walked through his apartment with his phone recording every room, every closet, every drawer, showing it all intact. He filmed the door and the new lock. He filmed the pile outside, before it was fully moved back in. He filmed the landlord's car, the license plate, because he'd learned something today: details matter. Rick leaned in and said, this part might feel like overkill, but it's not. It's how you win. And this is the part most people don't understand until it happens to them. Illegal lockouts aren't just a landlord being mean. They can destabilize your entire life in a single afternoon. If you're disabled, your equipment is your independence. If you're a veteran with PTSD, being forced out can hit the same panic circuits as combat, Your brain doesn't care if the threat is a bomb or a lock you can't open. Threat is threat. If you've ever been one missed paycheck from the edge, you know what it feels like when the floor disappears. That afternoon, James had been sitting on the curb staring at his Purple Heart like it belonged to someone else. Like it was proof of a life that didn't protect him anymore, and now he was inside again. Still shaken, still angry, but no longer erased. By early evening, the landlord didn't try to argue anymore. He hovered at the edge of the lot, on his phone, avoiding the camera. The news crew left after getting enough footage to run the story. The officer took notes and left too. But the paper trail had started. Attorney Daniels told James she'd file immediately. And she meant it. Rick handed James a card with a number on it. "That's me," he said. "Any weird stuff tonight you call." James looked at the card like it was unreal. "I don't know how to repay you." Rick shook his head. "Don't, just stay standing." The big guy stepped into the doorway, nodded at James. "You need groceries, you got food." James hesitated. "Not really." The big guy turned back out to the group. "Who's got a run in them?" 2 people volunteered. Another tossed Rick some cash like it was nothing. James tried to refuse. Pride surged up like it always did. Rick cut it off gently. "Let people help." James stared for a second, then nodded. They brought back groceries, basic stuff, not charity brand showmanship, just food. Someone replaced the broken frame glass later that week, quietly, like they didn't want applause for it. And when the building finally went quiet, when the bikes were gone and the lot looked normal again, James sat on his couch and listened to his own breathing. He realized he'd been holding his breath for hours. He took his phone out and stared at the landlord's number. This time, the landlord called him. James let it ring. Then he answered on speaker, because Attorney Daniels told him to. "James," the landlord said, voice different now. Softer. "What can work something out?" James looked at the cracked Purple Heart frame sitting on the table. He said, "Talk to my lawyer." The landlord paused. "You don't need to do all that." James' voice stayed even. "You shouldn't have done what you did." Click. James ended the call. "And if you're watching this thinking, could that happen to me? Listen closely. In Tennessee, guidance for renters is clear that a landlord can't change the locks or shut off utilities to force you out. And most of the time, they need to go to court first. And legal aid guidance in Tennessee says, if a landlord tries a self-help eviction, like changing locks or shutting off utilities, call local law enforcement and tell them you haven't been taken to court and the landlord is acting illegally. So here's the part I want you to do with that information: save it. Not to be paranoid, just to be prepared. Because the scariest part of what happened to James isn't the lock. It's how quickly the world tried to pretend he didn't belong anywhere. And how many people looked away until someone didn't. That neighbor, Rick, could have kept walking. He could have said, "That's between you and your landlord." He could have told himself the usual lie, "It's not my business." Instead, he listened. And one phone call flipped the whole day. Now, I'm not telling you the answer is always 48 bikers and a news crew. Most of the time, it won't look like that. Most of the time, the reinforcements are quieter: a friend who shows up, a neighbor who records, a legal aid office that picks up, an officer who actually does the job right, a community that refuses to let a vulnerable person get steamrolled. But the principle is the same. Predators count on isolation. They count on shame. They count on you being too tired to argue. They count on you sitting on the curb and deciding you don't have the energy to fight. James almost did, not because he's weak, because he's human. Because pain wears you down in ways nobody sees. Later that night, James stood at his window and looked down at the empty lot. The air was cooler. The city lights blinked like they always had. Nashville kept moving like it didn't care. But James cared. He thought about that moment on the curb, how small he felt, how pointless everything seemed, and he made himself a promise. Not a grand promise. Not a speech. Just a simple one: next time he saw somebody sitting on the curb with their life in bags, he wouldn't look away. He'd walk over. He'd ask one question. And if they didn't have anyone to call, he'd be the call. If you want more stories like this, real, world justice, community backbone, and the kind of moments that remind you people can still show up, subscribe right now. And drop a comment with one word, STNDN. I read the comments, and I want to know how many of you are still standing too.